If I could burn that letter, I would, but I know it would find its way back to me. That's how it all began. Not with a scream in the night, not with a knock at my door, not even with the sound of shovels breaking earth. It started with a single envelope yellowed at the edges, smelling faintly of smoke and something metallic. The postman swore he hadn't delivered it. He even showed me the day's log. No letters, no parcels, nothing addressed to my name. And yet, there it was, sitting neatly on my kitchen table when I came back from the market, like it had been waiting. The handwriting was jagged, almost shaking, as if the writer's hands had been cold or frightened. Inside, just one sheet of paper. No greeting, no signature, only a few words, etched in ink that looked far too dark to be ordinary. They are gone. All of them. Don't come looking. My eyes scanned the line again and again. Gone. That word didn't leave my mind. I tried to think friends, family, an accident, but there was no name, no place. Then, at the bottom, almost as if it had been added as an afterthought, was a set of coordinates. I recognized the area immediately, a rural county that didn't even appear on most modern maps. My grandfather had told me stories about it when I was a child, about a little settlement, tucked between the hills, a place called Mirewood Hollow. I had always assumed it was more of a campfire tale than a real location, but the coordinates, they were real. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with the letter in front of me, the clock ticking too loudly, the hum of the refrigerator cutting into my thoughts. Every creak of the house felt amplified. By morning, curiosity had gnawed away at caution. You know how people always say, don't go looking for trouble. I think we only pretend to believe that. Deep down, we need to know. The drive out to the coordinates was long. The further I went, the less I saw of civilization. No cars, no road signs, just narrow, cracked asphalt, lined by skeletal trees, their branches clawing at the pale winter sky. Halfway there, my phone lost signal. Not just reception, its battery percentage, which had been at 78% when I left, now blinked 1%. Then it shut off entirely. I told myself it was just a malfunction, but you don't believe that either, do you? By late afternoon, I reached a wooden sign so weathered the paint had almost vanished. I could just make out the carved letters. My Hollow Est 1893. The road beyond it was dirt now, sloping downward into a valley where mist clung low to the ground. The temperature dropped noticeably the moment I crossed under that arch of old timber. At first, I thought I'd gotten the wrong place. The valley looked empty, but as I drove further in, the outlines of buildings appeared through the fog houses. A church, a general store. They all looked intact, but not a single window showed light. Not a single door was open. Not a single soul walked the streets. I parked in the middle of the main road. My own footsteps sounded too loud as I stepped out. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and something else, something metallic. I called out, knocking. I knocked on the door of the nearest house. Inside, I found plates set neatly on a dining table, food still on them, bread gone stale, soup clotted into cold lumps, as if someone had been about to eat and simply vanished. Every house was the same. Beds unmade but still warm to the touch. Water still running in one kitchen sink, steam rising as if someone had just stepped away. It wasn't until I reached the edge of the town that I saw it, the first real sign that something was deeply wrong. Near a well, a circle of chairs had been set up. 6 of them. In each chair sat a coat, boots underneath, a hat resting on the seat, but no people, no bones, no signs of struggle, just absence. That's when I heard it. A low, rhythmic sound, somewhere between a hum and a whisper, coming from the church at the center of the town. I didn't want to go in, but I think you already know I did. The church doors were heavy. They were darkened by age and moisture. I expected them to groan when I pushed, but they opened without a sound too easily, like someone had been waiting. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not incense. Something older, a mix of damp stone, candle wax, and something faintly sweet, almost like overripe fruit left in the sun too long. Inside, it was dim. The only light came from a few tall candles along the altar, their flames barely moving, as if the air itself didn't dare stir. The pews were empty, dustless, like they had been used only moments ago. That's when I saw the figure. At first I thought it was a priest. He stood at the altar, hands clasped, head bowed. His robes were deep black, stitched with a strange silver thread that caught the candlelight in thin, glimmering patterns. I took a step forward. Hello. His head snapped up so quickly I nearly stumbled back. His eyes, God, his eyes were wrong. Not glowing, not monstrous, just too dark. So dark they seemed to swallow the light around them. You shouldn't be here, he said. His voice was deep, but there was something uneven in it, like hearing a recording played at the wrong speed. I got a letter. I started pulling it from my pocket, but when I glanced down, it was gone. My hand gripped only air. The man's expression didn't change. They left before the sun touched the hill. All of them. You can still feel where they walked, if you listen. I didn't understand. Left where? Why? He tilted his head, and in the flicker of candlelight, I saw the silver threads in his robes form shaped circles, lines, spirals, almost like maps. The Hollow doesn't lose people, he said. It trades them. My skin prickled. Trades with who? His lips moved, but no sound came out. And then, without warning, every candle went out at once. The darkness was complete. No glow from windows, no outline of doors. Just black, thick, and suffocating. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears. And then footsteps. Not his. Too many. All around me, moving at an even, deliberate pace. I stumbled backward until my hand found the edge of a pew. Something brushed past me soft like the hem of a skirt. Then another, and another. The air grew colder, and I realized I could smell it again, that faint metallic scent. Stronger now. It reminded me of holding a coin between your teeth. A voice spoke close to my ear. Not the man's voice. You're not theirs. Not yet. My knees went weak. I spun toward the sound, but there was nothing. And then, just as suddenly as it had gone out, the candlelight returned. The man in black was gone. The pews were empty. I ran. I didn't care where, I just needed out. But when I burst through the church doors, the town didn't look the same. The mist was thicker now, swirling in slow spirals. The sky above was a pale, sickly yellow, like old parchment. The street I had driven down earlier now seemed narrower, the buildings leaning inward, and at the very end of the road, I saw them. The townsfolk, dozens of them, standing in perfect stillness, faces pale, eyes unfocused, like they were looking past me. They didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. All at once, every single one of them turned their heads toward me. They turned their heads in unison, like a single mechanical gesture. No hesitation, no variation. It was wrong. No group of living people moved like that. For a moment, none of us moved. My breath felt caught halfway in my chest, my pulse hammering. In my ears, I didn't even realize I was stepping backward until I felt my heel hit the church step behind me. That's when one of them, a woman near the front, smiled. It wasn't warm, it wasn't even a human kind of smile. Her lips pulled back too far, revealing teeth that looked not sharp, but too perfect, like they'd been made. The others followed her lead, their faces splitting into those same impossible grins. And then, without a sound, they began walking toward me. I tried to speak, to say, "Stop," or "Who are you?" But the words died in my throat. The air felt thicker now, like I was trying to breathe through soaked cloth. Their footsteps were strangely soft, almost muffled, but they kept perfect time, moving together as if pulled by invisible strings. I turned and bolted into the mist. I didn't care which direction, I just had to put distance between myself and them. The ground beneath my boots felt uneven, softer than I remembered. My steps sank slightly, like I was walking across damp earth. Every few strides, I swore I could hear something else pacing me in the foglighter steps. Quicker, keeping to my right side, I reached what looked like an intersection, but the streets no longer matched the map I'd studied before coming here. Buildings were warped, walls leaning, roofs sagging, some windows bricked up while others were gaping holes. I ducked into an alley, hoping to lose them. The shadows felt deeper there, almost swallowing the mist itself. My breathing echoed strangely, bouncing back at me in a way that made it sound like there were two of me breathing. Halfway down, I stopped. Not because I wanted to be, because I couldn't move. My feet simply refused to take another step, as if something in the ground was holding me. That's when I heard it. A low hum, not mechanical, not human. It was a vibration in the air, in my bones. It made my teeth ache. From the corner of the alley, something began to take shape in the mist. At first it looked like a figure tall, draped in rags, but as it moved closer, I realized the rags were moving, breathing. It stopped a few feet from me. I couldn't see its face, only the impression of where a head should be. And then, in the hum, I heard words. Not spoken, impressed directly into my mind. They gave themselves away. "Will you?" I tried to answer, but my jaw wouldn't open. My hands shook violently at my sides. The thing reached out an arm than it should have been, and its hand hovered just over my chest. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst right out. Then, shouting, I snapped my head toward the sound. It was coming from the far end of the alley. A man's voice, calling my name. I looked back. The thing was gone. Only mist remained. The voice called again, urgent. I ran toward it, my legs suddenly free again. At the end of the alley, a man in a wide-brimmed hat waved me forward. His coat was heavy and long, dusted with fine white powder like ash. "Don't look back," he said. As I neared him, his voice was firm, low, the kind you instinctively obey. I didn't. Not until we'd taken several sharp turns and ducked into what looked like an abandoned apothecary. Inside, the shelves were lined with glass jars, most empty, a few containing strange cloudy liquids. The man shut the door and slid a metal bar into place. Then he turned to me, eyes narrowing. "You're not from here. That's dangerous." I swallowed hard. "I just came to find out what happened to the village." He shook his head sharply. "It's not a village anymore. It's a mouth, and it's hungry." Before I could ask what that meant, something slammed against the door. Not knocking, not trying to break in, just pressing slowly, persistently, like a great weight leaning on the other side. The wooden frame groaned under the strain, the metal bar rattling in its brackets. Dust sifted down from the ceiling in lazy spirals, catching in the dim light from the single oil lamp on the counter. The man didn't flinch. He simply lifted one finger to his lips, a silent warning, and stepped back from the door as if moving closer might draw it in. I held my breath, every muscle in my body begging me to bolt deeper into the shop. But something about his stillness kept me rooted like a deer watching a predator, knowing that the wrong twitch would be fatal. The pressure on the door lasted longer than it should have. It wasn't frantic like someone trying to force their way in, it was patient, testing, measuring us. When it finally stopped, the silence that followed was worse. The man exhaled slowly. "It'll circle back. It always does." He walked past me and pulled a dusty curtain over the single window. The fabric was thick enough to smother the light, plunging us into a heavy gloom. I could smell the faint scent of mildew on it, he said, nodding toward a stool by the counter. I sat, my legs were shaking so badly that the stool wobbled under me. He pulled a leather satchel from under the counter and rummaged through it, producing a small tin. When he popped it open, a smell like burned herbs filled the air. He began sprinkling the blackened powder along the threshold of the door. "What is that?" I asked, my voice lower than I expected. "Something they don't like." His gaze flicked up to meet mine. For a moment, I thought he might actually answer. Instead, he shut the tin and slid it back into the satchel. "You came here for answers," he said, "but you won't like them. No one does." I swallowed, my throat dry. "Try me." He studied me for a long moment, then sat across from me, his elbows on his knees. "This place," he began, "used to be like any other. Fields, families, gossip, over fences. Then something took root. Not a person, not a thing you can see straight on. More like an idea. An invitation." I frowned. "An invitation to what? To leave?" His words hung in the air, absurd, but weighted with something I didn't understand. "People started disappearing," he continued. "At first, just a few. A boy on his way to school, a woman walking home from the market. No one saw where they went. No struggle, no blood, just gone. And then one day, the ones who were left realized that the houses were emptying faster than they were filling, and the ones who stayed too long started changing." I remembered the people in the street, the perfect smiles, the synchronized movements. My skin crawled. "What happens if you change?" I asked. He leaned forward slightly. "You don't come back, and you start helping it feed." Before I could respond, something skittered across the roof. Not heavy light, fast, like claws on old shingles. The sound traced a path from the back of the building to the front, stopping directly above us. I tilted my head back, listening. That's when I heard it breathing. Slow, deep, deliberate. The man reached under the counter and pulled out something, wrapped in cloth. He unrolled it to reveal a long, curved blade, its metal dulled with age but sharp along the edge. "Time to move," he said simply. He blew out the lamp, plunging us into darkness. The smell of extinguished oil filled the room. I heard him unlatch a door at the back of the shop. I followed him into an even narrower corridor, my hands grazing the rough, cold walls. The darkness here wasn't just from the lack of light, it felt thicker, almost like walking through ink. We emerged into a courtyard enclosed by high brick walls, their surfaces slick with moisture. The mist swelled above us, cutting off the sky. The man pointed to a heavy wooden door in the far wall. "That'll take us closer to the heart." "The heart of what?" He didn't answer. We crossed the courtyard quickly. As he unlocked the door, I glanced back. Something was perched on the roof of the apothecary. It wasn't human. Its limbs were too long, too thin, and they bent in ways that made my stomach turn. It had no face, just smooth skin stretched where features should have been. And yet, I knew it was looking at me. The man grabbed my arm and yanked me inside before I could see more. The door slammed shut behind us, and we were in a tunnel stone, narrow and dripping with condensation. The air here was colder, smelling faintly of earth and something metallic. As we walked, the walls seemed to close in. I ran my fingers along the damp stone, feeling grooves and indentations like claw marks. The man's voice was barely above a whisper when he said, "If you hear footsteps behind us, don't turn around." I opened my mouth to ask why, and then I heard them. They were soft at first, barely louder than my own footsteps, but they carried a strange rhythm slightly off, as if whoever or whatever was behind us was mimicking the sound of walking without quite understanding how it worked. The man's grip on my wrist tightened. "Keep your pace steady," he whispered. "If it thinks you've noticed, it will get bolder." My heartbeat was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I tried to focus on the ground ahead, but the urge to glance over my shoulder was overwhelming. Every instinct screamed at me to see what was there, but some deeper part of me knew that looking would be a mistake. The tunnel curved slightly, the light from the door we'd entered fading into a heavy, suffocating black. Our only illumination came from the faint phosphorescent shimmer on the damp walls, pale green glows that pulsed like something alive. I forced my breathing to slow, taking shallow, quiet sips of air, but the footsteps were getting closer, too close. I could hear the drag of something cloth, flesh, scraping the stone. The rhythm was breaking, now punctuated by wet, irregular slaps. Then it whispered. I didn't hear words at first, just a hiss, low and curling through the dark. But then, faintly, like a thought I wasn't supposed to have, came, "Turn around." Every muscle in my body tightened. My eyes flicked involuntarily to the side, and I felt the man's grip clamp down harder. "No," he hissed. We kept walking. The tunnel widened slightly ahead, opening into a round chamber supported by thick, crumbling pillars. Water dripped from somewhere high above, echoing into the silence. Only when we reached the center of the chamber did the man stop. He pulled a small glass vial from his coat, shaking it until the liquid inside began to glow faintly. The light revealed just enough for me to see the edges of the chamber, dark doorways leading into other tunnels, and strange carvings etched into the stone floor beneath our feet. "What is this place?" I asked. "Older than the town," he said. "Older than most things you've seen." The carvings were spirals, concentric and precise, with jagged symbols branching off their edges. Some of them looked like faces twisted into shapes no human skull could make. The footsteps had stopped. I turned my head slowly toward the tunnel we had just come from. It was empty, or so I thought, from the shadows just beyond the faint glow of the vial. Something leaned forward, its head tilting too far to one side, like it was curious. Its body was still hidden, but I could see a single, elongated hand braced against the stone. The fingers were wrung to many joints, ending in black, needle-like tips that clicked softly against the wall. The man muttered something in a language I didn't recognize, then smashed the vial on the ground. The liquid hissed, spilling across the carvings. The spirals lit up, casting an eerie, pulsating light that made the shadows shiver. The thing in the tunnel recoiled. Slowly, deliberately, it drew its hand back into the dark. "We don't have long," the man said, his voice urgent. We chose one of the other tunnels and kept moving. The light from the spirals faded behind us, and the air grew heavier. The walls here were rougher, clawed deep in places. After several minutes, the tunnel opened into what looked like the remnants of an underground square, stone benches, a dried fountain, and the skeleton of what might have once been a tree. The branches were long gone, but the twisted trunk remained, its bark petrified into black, cracked stone. There was something nailed to it. I approached, my skin crawling. It was a wooden sign, the letters carved deep but worn smooth with age. I brushed away some of the grime to read it. "This is where they said no." Before I could ask what that meant, a sound rose from the darkness beyond the square. Not footsteps this time, laughter. It wasn't joyful. It wasn't even mocking. It was hollow, like someone was remembering what laughter sounded like but had forgotten the point of it. The sound bounced off the stone, making it impossible to tell where it came from. The man stepped in front of me, raising the curved blade. His shoulders were tense, and for the first time since I'd met him, I thought I saw fear in his eyes. "They found us faster than I thought," he murmured. From the black mouths of the surrounding tunnels, figures began to emerge. Dozens of them. Their faces were wrong. They looked human from the neck down, wearing tattered remnants of clothing, but their heads were blurred, shifting like looking at an image that wouldn't come into focus. Every few seconds, the blur snapped into a face, sometimes smiling, sometimes screaming before slipping back into distortion. They formed a loose circle around us, their movements slow, deliberate, like predators playing with prey. The man tightened, his grip on the blade. If they speak to you, don't answer. One of them stepped forward. Its face was that of a young woman, her eyes wide and pleading. Please, she said, help me. I froze. She's not real, the man growled. Woman's mouth twisted into a grin far too wide for her face. Then her head blurred again. The others began to close in. The man didn't wait. He slashed at the nearest figure, the blade leaving a faint glowing trail in the air. The creature recoiled with a sound like tearing fabric. Run, he barked. Didn't hesitate. We bolted toward the far tunnel, the circle breaking just enough for us to squeeze through. The creatures didn't chase at first, they just watched, their heads tilting in unison. Then, all at once, they moved. The sound of their pursuit filled the tunnel, skittering feet, scraping claws, that horrible not quite laughter. The man grabbed my hand again. The next door we find, no matter what's behind it, we take it. I nodded, too terrified to speak. Somewhere behind us, one of them screamed. It was high-pitched and sharp, echoing like metal grinding against stone. My ears rang and I stumbled, but the man yanked me upright, and then I saw it's a rusted iron door ahead, half buried in the tunnel. We reached it just as the footsteps closed in. The man shoved it open, and we tumbled through. The last thing I saw before he slammed it shut was a handpail, jointed too many times, curling around the edge of the door frame. It didn't get inside, but it left deep scratches in the metal before retreating. The iron door sealed with a heavy thud, followed by the grinding sound of the man sliding a metal bar into place. For a few moments, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing, echoing in the confined space. The air was warmer here, stale but with a faint scent of burning charcoal maybe. My eyes adjusted slowly to the dim orange glow that filled the narrow corridor ahead. It wasn't coming from a lantern or torch, but from thin cracks in the walls, as if something was burning inside the stone itself. The man leaned against the door, his head bowed, listening. I realized he wasn't just catching his breath, he was making sure nothing outside was still moving. Finally, he whispered, "They don't like this place. We'll be safe for a while." Safe. The word felt hollow here. The corridor sloped downward, the floor a patchwork of uneven stone slabs. Some were carved with shallow lines like veins, glowing faintly in rhythm with the light in the walls. I traced my fingers along one as we walked, and a sudden cold sensation shot up my arm like plunging my hand into ice water. The man noticed. "Don't touch them. The stone remembers." We moved deeper, the warmth growing with every step. Soon, I began to hear something faint, dull, rhythmic thumps. At first, I thought it might be machinery, but the sound was too irregular, too organic. The corridor opened into a massive chamber. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. The walls curved upward into a dome, every inch covered with carvings, spirals, jagged symbols, and faces. But unlike the carvings in the earlier chamber, these faces had eyes made of polished black stones, and they seemed to follow me no matter where I moved. In the center of the chamber was a pit, and from that pit came the thumping sound. A faint, red glow pulsed from within, lighting the underside of the man's face as he peered over the edge. I joined him, hesitating before I looked. At first it seemed empty, just darkness and the glow reflecting off the rough walls. But then something shifted far below, something huge. It was like watching a mountain breathe. The surface rippled, and I caught glimpses of something slick, glistening in the dim light. Each thump shook the stone under my feet, and the warmth in the air grew stronger with every beat. I pulled back, my throat dry. "What is it?" He didn't look away from the pit. "A part of why the town vanished." The words hung in the air, heavier than the heat. Before I could ask more, a sound rolled through the chamber, low, resonant moan that made my bones vibrate. The glow from the pit brightened, and the carvings on the walls seemed to writhe in the shifting light. The man grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a narrow archway on the far side of the chamber. "We can't stay here when it wakes." We slipped into the archway just as the thumping grew faster. My pulse matched its rhythm, and a sickening thought clawed at me that maybe it wasn't my pulse matching it, but it sinking with me. The passage beyond was cramped, the ceiling so low I had to hunch. The air cooled as we moved away from the pit, but the sense of pressure in my chest didn't fade. After a while, the tunnel widened again into a room filled with shelves, hundreds of them stacked with objects covered in dust. At first glance it looked like an old library, but as I brushed dust from the nearest item, I realized these weren't books, they were boxes. Each one carved from the same black stone as the eyes in the chamber carvings. Each one sealed with A thin strip of metal etched with symbols I didn't recognize. "What are these?" I asked. The man's expression darkened. "Names." I frowned. "Names of what?" He hesitated, then ran his hand over one of the boxes. "Of those who said yes." Before I could press him further, something clattered in the darkness at the far end of the room. We both froze. It wasn't loud, just a small object tipping from one of the shelves. But in the silence, it was enough to make every nerve in my body go taut. The man drew the curved blade again. His voice dropped to almost nothing. "We weren't followed here. We were waiting here." I didn't understand at first, but then I heard a faint shuffle, followed by the sound of something dragging across the stone. The glow from the corridor behind us dimmed it. And then, from the shadows between the shelves, 2 pinpoints of pale light appeared, hovering just above the ground. They blinked out, then reappeared closer. Eyes. The man raised his blade. "Stay behind me." I did, but my own legs had begun to move backward before I realized it. My shoulder brushed one of the shelves, and the box nearest me trembled. The creature stepped into view. It was thin, so thin I could see the sharp curve of its ribs through its gray skin. Its face was long, featureless except for those glowing eyes and a slit of a mouth that didn't move when it breathed. It tilted its head like the others had, then slowly raised a hand and pointed toward me. My knees locked. The man swung the blade in a warning arc, but the creature didn't flinch. It simply lowered its arm and whispered, "Not to him, to me." The words slithered into my mind, without passing through my ears. "Your name isn't yours anymore." The shelves around us began to rattle. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The man lunged, swinging the blade in a wide arc that passed through the creature's chest. There was no blood, only a hiss and a burst of cold air that snuffed out the glow in the creature's eyes. It crumpled silently to the floor, vanishing before it hit the stone. The rattling stopped. The man didn't look at me. He simply started toward another door at the far end of the room. "We can't stay near the names," I followed, but my mind kept circling back to what the creature had said. And for the first time, I realized I couldn't remember if I'd told him my name when we met. Or if I even knew it anymore. The next passage felt different from the others, not just in structure, but in something deeper. The air had a thin metallic taste, and the stone beneath my feet seemed to absorb sound rather than carry it. Our footsteps were muted, swallowed. Before they could echo, the man's shoulders were tense, his movements sharper. He didn't explain where we were going, and I didn't ask. By now, I understood that questions only led to more questions. After several minutes, the passage ended, abruptly at a wall of iron bars. Behind them was a space so vast my eyes couldn't find its far end, though a faint shimmer of light seemed to dance in the distance. The man withdrew a ring of keys from his coat, oddly ordinary keys, nothing like the strange metal seals I'd seen before. He unlocked the gate and stepped through without hesitation. As I crossed the threshold, the air changed again. It was colder here, yet the back of my neck prickled with heat, like someone's breath was on it. The floor sloped downward, in a gentle spiral. I could now see that the shimmering light came from hundreds, maybe thousands of small glass containers arranged in neat rows along the walls. Each held a faintly glowing liquid, and within that liquid, something floated. I stepped closer, to one. The shape inside was small, no bigger than my palm. At first I thought it was a carved figurine, but then I saw the way its chest rose and fell, ever so slightly. It was breathing. I pulled back sharply. "What are these?" The man didn't stop walking. Echoes. That single word twisted something in my gut. Echoes of what? Of people who were never meant to leave. My mind raced with images of the missing townsfolk. Were these them, trapped here, preserved? We continued downward, passing row after row of the containers. Some of the shapes inside were human-like, others weren't. Limbs bent at unnatural angles, faces elongated into something almost animal. One jar held nothing but a swirl of black smoke, constantly shifting, pressing against the glass as if testing for a weakness. I kept my distance. Near the base of the spiral, we came to an alcove where a single container sat on a pedestal. Unlike the others, this one was wrapped in chains and coated with thick wax, sealing its lid completely. The man stopped here, resting one hand on the container. His voice was low. "This one is why they don't let the town exist anymore." I felt the temperature drop sharply. My breath came out in pale clouds. The liquid inside was almost black, and whatever floated within was too obscured to see clearly. But as I stared, the surface shifted just enough for an eye to appear milky white, lidless, staring straight at me. I staggered back. "What is it?" He looked at me for the first time in what felt like hours. Not what who, before I could respond. The wax around the lid cracked, just slightly. A faint hiss escaped, like steam from boiling water. The man's hand shot out to hold the seal in place, but the chains rattled under his grip. Something was trying to get out. We both froze as a deep guttural whisper rose from within the container. I couldn't understand the words, but I felt them like claws raking across the inside of my skull. The whisper grew louder, pressing at the walls of my mind until I thought my thoughts might split open. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The man stepped back, breathing hard. His knuckles were white around the blade in his hand. We shouldn't have come this close. We left the alcove quickly, climbing back up the spiral path. But as we passed the other containers, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. Glowing liquids were dimming. One by one, the lights inside were going out. I quickened my pace, trying to keep up with him. Is it waking them up? He didn't answer. His silence was worse than any confirmation. By the time we reached the iron gate again, half the rows behind us had gone dark. Shapes inside the containers were twitching now, their movements growing sharper, more deliberate. I heard the faint sound of glass cracking somewhere in the depths below. The man locked the gate behind us, jamming the keys deep into his coat. His voice was barely audible. We need to get to the tower before it does. I almost asked what, but the answer was already crawling up my spine. Whatever was in that chained container, it was awake now. And if the rest were following, the town hadn't vanished, it had been taken. We started toward another tunnel, but halfway through I heard it again. That same whisper, only now it wasn't coming from below, it was right behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed that if I looked, I'd see something I could never unsee. The man's hand closed around my wrist, pulling me forward, his grip iron hard. The tunnel here was narrower, the ceiling low enough that I had to hunch slightly. A faint trickle of water ran along one side, catching the light from his lantern in cold glimmers. The whisper followed us, slithering along the walls. It wasn't just sound, it was inside me, curling around my thoughts, nudging memories I hadn't touched in years. I remembered the first time I'd come to the village as a child, the way the houses seemed to lean in, watching how the silence felt almost polite, but not quite. Now I understood. It had been waiting. The man quickened his pace, muttering under his breath. I caught fragments too soon, wasn't meant to. Not ready. Ahead, the tunnel widened into a circular chamber. In its center stood a spiral staircase made entirely of black iron, winding upward into a shaft so tall I couldn't see the top. This is the tower? I asked. He shook his head. The tower's above. This is the spine. The stairs groaned under our weight as we climbed. I glanced down once, just once, and wished I hadn't. The tunnel below us was no longer empty. Something was moving. There, slow and deliberate, its form barely visible in the dim light. We climbed faster. Halfway up, the air shifted again. The temperature rose sharply, and a faint, acrid smell filled my nose. It was like burned hair mixed with hot metal. My throat tightened, and my skin prickled with sweat. That's when I heard them. Not whispers this time, but breathing. Dozens of steady, synchronized breaths, in and out, like a chorus. I looked up and froze. Shapes were pressed against the inner walls of the shaft, clinging to the stone like insects. Their bodies were pale and slick, limbs impossibly long, faces featureless except for small, puckered mouths. Each mouth expanded and contracted in perfect rhythm with the breathing. I tried not to look, but one of them turned its head toward me. I didn't think it had eyes, but somehow it saw me. The man didn't pause. Don't stop. Don't acknowledge. Then I forced myself to move, even as the breathing quickened. The sound grew wetter, more frantic, and the creatures began shifting on the walls. One by one, they released their grip and dropped toward the staircase. We ran. The steps clanged under our boots, each sound echoing up into the blackness above. I could hear the creatures hitting the steps behind us, scraping metal, their limbs clicking against the iron like knives. At last, the stairs ended in a round hatch. The man shoved it open, and a blast of cold wind hit my face. We stumbled out into the open night air, the moon glaring white and pitiless above us. We were on the roof of a massive stone structure, the tower he'd spoken of. From here, I could see the entire valley below, and it was empty. No lights, no roads, not even the outlines of the village. It was as if the land had been scooped clean. The man pulled something from his coat, a small silver disc etched with symbols I didn't recognize. He placed it on the stone floor of the tower roof and began speaking in a language I'd never heard before. The ground trembled beneath us. Far below, I heard glass shatter, followed by a chorus of screams that made my stomach twist. "They're loose," I whispered. He didn't stop chanting. The wind picked up, swirling around us in a spiral that matched the staircase we'd climbed. The disc began to glow faintly, then brighter, until it was almost painful to look at Dot from the darkness at the tower's edge. Something began to rise. At first I thought it was smoke, but then I saw the movement inside its arms, legs, faces, pressed against a swirling mass of shadow. The man's chanting grew louder, almost a shout. My ears popped from the pressure in the air. The shadow surged forward, slamming into an invisible barrier just beyond the disc. The impact rattled my bones, and a dozen pale hands pressed against the air, fingers twitching, nails scraping at nothing. "They can't cross," the man said, his voice hoarse. "Not if I hold the seal." I wanted to believe him. I really did that, but then one of the faces in the shadow turned toward me and I recognized it. It was the woman from the first house I'd visited in the village. The one who'd smiled too long. Her mouth opened wide, wider than a mouth should, and she spoke in that same guttural whisper I'd heard in the chained container. The man faltered, just slightly. His voice caught on a word. The glow from the disc flickered, and the shadow pushed harder. The air split open with a sound I can only describe as bone tearing through wet cloth. The man dropped to one knee, clutching his throat as if the words he'd been chanting had turned against him. The shadow didn't wait. It surged forward, spilling across the roof like boiling tar, swallowing the moonlight. The woman's face, if you could still call it that, was inches from mine now. Her eyes, hollow as a cave, held something like recognition and hunger. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the uneven stone. My palms hit the cold surface behind me, but instead of stone, I felt something soft, damp like skin. I looked down. The stone wasn't stone anymore. The roof was changing beneath my hands, warping, flexing like the inside of a living thing. The man coughed, spat dark blood, and forced himself upright. "It's using the village's memory against us. If it knows you, it can take you." How does it know me?" My voice was shaking so badly I could barely form the words. "You came here," he said simply, as though that explained everything. The shadow writhed, its surface rippling with more faces, more memories. A child's laugh, the slam of a wooden door, the smell of smoke and damp earth. All of it was mine. The silver disc still pulsed faintly at the center of the roof, but the light was fading, smothered by the encroaching dark. The man reached for it, his fingers trembling. "You have to hold it. I can't keep it steady anymore." I didn't want to touch it. Something in my bones screamed against it. But I also knew, without needing him to tell me, if the light went out, there would be no more roof, no more tower, no more me. The moment my hands closed around the disc, it burned. Not just heat memories, burned. Flashes of my life scorched through my mind in a rush. The smell of my mother's perfume, the cold sweat on my neck the night my house was broken into, the laughter of friends whose faces I could barely recall. It wasn't showing me these things, it was taking them. The man's voice returned, weaker but still chanting. The shadow hesitated, pulling back slightly, as if considering. Then it lunged, slamming against the invisible barrier again. This time, the barrier cracked. A sound like shattering glass rang in my ears. From the break, long pale arms thrust through, clawing at the air between us. They weren't reaching for the man, they were reaching for me. I tightened my grip on the disc, screaming as the burn spread up my arms, into my chest. The light flared again, but I could feel something changing inside it. The glow wasn't silver anymore, it was deep, red, the color of blood in low light. The shadow reacted instantly, not retreating but feeding on the change. The faces twisted into grins, and the hands withdrew, not in fear, but an invitation. The man noticed too. His chant broke. "You're not resisting it, you're joining it." "I'm not," but even as I spoke, I could feel the truth in his words. The heat wasn't just pain now, it was comfort, familiar, like slipping into a warm bath after being in the cold too long. The barrier split wider. The shadow began to flow through instead of against it, coiling around my legs like smoke made solid. The man stepped forward, trying to pull the disc from my hands. "Let go, or it'll take everything." The woman's face appeared again in the shadow, closer than ever. She leaned in until her lips brushed my ear, her whisper impossibly clear despite the wind. "You're already one of us." The man yanked hard, and the disc slipped from my grip. The light sputtered, then died completely. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then the shadow swallowed us whole. I couldn't tell if I was falling, floating, or simply ceasing to be. Images rushed past, faces I didn't know, places I'd never been. I thought I saw the village again, whole and bustling, but every person's eyes were empty. Their smiles stretched too wide, and then, just as suddenly, I was standing in the middle of a cobblestone street. The air smelled of rain. The houses were here, the lights warm in their windows. The man stood beside me, breathing hard. "It didn't take us," he said. I looked around. The villagers were walking past, chatting, carrying baskets of food, greeting one another, and not one of them looked at us. "They don't see us," I whispered. He shook his head. "No, we're not really here. We're in the memory of the village, and memories don't last forever." Already, the edges of the street were blurring, the houses melting into a haze. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the breathing again slow, steady, in unison. The man turned to me. "We have one chance to get out before it all fades. But you're not going to like what it costs." I couldn't tell if I was running away or being led somewhere. The path through the forest was narrow, and every step sounded like the snapping of dry bones beneath my feet. The wind bit at my skin, but it carried something else, a distant whisper repeating my name, as if calling me back. With each tree I passed, I felt something moving just behind me, always out of sight. When I finally crossed the last row of trees, the world before me looked wrong. Where there should have been the dirt road and the hills beyond, there was only a grey plain, as if the ground had been scorched until all color was gone. The sky hung low and heavy, seeming ready to collapse. At the center, where the town should have stood, there was nothing but a massive void, not a field, but a bottomless pit, swallowing the light. I looked around for any sign of life, but found only marks on the ground, footprints, many of them, all pointing to the same spot, the abyss. They all vanished right at the edge, as if whoever left them had walked straight in without hesitation. The air there was different. No scent of earth, plants, or rain, only a metallic, bitter odor, like old blood. Pressure built in my ears, and I realized a deep hum was rising from inside the pit. I tried to step back, but my legs felt like they weighed a ton. A strange heat brushed the back of my neck, as though someone was standing just behind me, watching. The edge was only a few steps away, and without meaning to, I moved forward. When I looked inside, I didn't see darkness. I saw images, flashes of faces, streets, houses, and me, walking through those same streets, but older, with hollow eyes and pale skin. The ground beneath my feet began to crumble, and in that moment I understood that it wasn't just the town that had vanished. It was as if the place itself was calling me to become part of it. Before I could resist, I felt cold hands on my shoulders, pulling me forward. There was no fall, only darkness. When I woke, I was in the middle of a deserted road. Behind me, only forest. No sign of the abyss, no trace of the town. But in my pocket, I found something that shouldn't have been there. A small, rusted key, with the name of the town engraved on it. That's when I realized I hadn't escaped. I'd only been let go. For now, in the end, there's only one certainty. The world we see might not be all that exists. Tell me what you think, and if you dare, come back tomorrow. There's always a new story waiting for you. But remember, some stories never end.